India and Australia relations are now in energizing space, especially if we have to talk about the journey in energy sector, which is playing a vital role and important. And both the Prime Minister's visit to India and Australia respectively, and respectively their countries as well. They were hit on the agenda, they were topmost in the agenda. And it is very much important how and in which way both the countries go ahead in this very particular sector and try and come out with something on map that will energize it in more and better way. And to have a talk on India and Australia energy and how and in which way it will energize, I'm joined by Mr. Richard Cottee with me. He's the Executive Chairman of the State Gas Limited, and he's also known as Gas Pioneer of Australia. Thank you so much, Richard Cottee, sir, for having this very particular time and space for us. This is something which is important. Prime Minister Narendra Modi just last week visited Australia, and this was followed, this all came followed in March when it was Prime Minister Anthony Albanese who visited India.
Yes,
and on a
chariot run around the stadium.
Yes, absolutely. And on that very particular agenda, sir, there were renewable energy, green gas, and critical minerals top on the agenda. Our very first question to you, sir: where the two countries stay in the map when they have to talk about this very particular energy sector?
Look, I think we are naturally complementary countries. The strengths that India has, Australia doesn't have, and Australia is blessed with a large amount of natural gas, particularly offshore Western Australia, and coal seam gas within Queensland. And as well as a number of critical minerals. We share a common love of cricket. Sometimes that relationship can get a bit heated, but that's cricket for you. But I think there's a lot of goodwill, and it's going to be critically important that Australia continues to support other particularly democratic countries around Asia. This is our backyard. It is India's backyard. We need to work together to ensure that we have the best backyard the world can possibly have.
Yeah. Certainly, we need to work together. So, how do you find a map ahead? What are the important parameters that need to be included in the map to go ahead and find out the goals?
I think obviously when it comes to the energy space, there's going to be need to be the infrastructure, a timetable for the infrastructure for whatever the energy needs are. I think the private. It's always taking a long time. In fact, I visited India with Anna Bligh, the Premier of Queensland, then in 2008, and signed a LO, a letter of intent for a supply of LNG back then. So, these things, Rome's not built in a day. If you start with goodwill and there's a commercial need, I believe that you'll have a long and very fruitful relationship, provided there is trust on both sides and integrity on both sides.
Sir, somewhere it is said and spoken about that if we have to talk about the mobilizing capital, for the renewable energy push, and so it is a must or need from the side of Australia for India to grow ahead. What is your point of view in this?
Look, capital, for certain areas, capital is going to be very important, and the garnering of capital. Equally, I think, from an importing country's point of view, diversification of sources is geopolitically important as well. A lot of this, particularly hydrogen and natural gas, are really quite capital intensive, but it also requires the infrastructure to import it as well, which is even capital intensive as well.
So, in the very important multilateral forums like G20, Quad, these are the important topics, and there are important goals. Both the countries have their own, important goals. How both of them can help each other in going ahead and achieving those goals. Talk about the carbon free, or talk about the otherwise.
Look, I think there's always going to be a conflict in any international relationship between your domestic political needs and your international political needs. No country's immune from that. And I think there has to be a balance between the shrill calls from the domestic political needs of the country to ensure that the longer term aim of stable international relationships and clean energy, clean skies, health plays an incredibly important part in this green energy push, and I'm sure that we will work together.
Sir, when we talk about working together, there is an important element that both the countries want to work. It's towards having their own independent platforms and polls to all of these things. And especially if it is better if it is away from China. How do you look at that?
Well, I think China doesn't play cricket, so that's obviously a minus comparative to India. Look, I think whenever a trading nation gets too big or too powerful, you always need to have a degree to which there is a counterbalance. Maybe in the 80s it was Japan, now it's China. And we look forward to particularly we share a democratic heritage, if you like, and we both are parliamentary democracies on the Westminster system. And I think it's incumbent on us to ensure that the world-based order and the is maintained, and in particular that places like India can clean its environment up, increase the lifting out of poverty of a large sector of its a large but gradually smaller, diminishing sector of India, and it's magnificent to see just how much progress has been made. And I think Australia should play a not inconsiderable role in helping India achieve its potential.
That is certainly important as well, sir. If you have to talk about solar and critical mineral supply, where you find both the countries are right now, and in which way they can go ahead.
Unfortunately, with both critical minerals and solar, China totally dominates.
And the first question
yeah.
was on China.
And that's not healthy. And to have your energy security held in the hands of another country, particularly a country that may not have the same democratic standards that we do, is inappropriate, I think, over time. And clearly India should become much more of a solar superpower in the manufacturing sense, maybe solar panels, etc. And to do so, it's going to need to import even more energy for that manufacturing. So it's going to be very interesting in the future, but the world needs to diversify. I think the words are calling it de-risking the relationships, and I think India is going to be a critical component of that de-risking.
So, among both the Prime Minister's agenda, one of the key topic was green hydrogen. You talk about bilateral cooperation among the two countries on green hydrogen. This was the biggest push. How and in which way you feel this will go ahead, and what is an important thing that it needs to be done? Because Green Hydrogen Task Force has been announced, it has been agreed upon. How and in which way do you?
Look, green hydrogen is still got a lot of technical challenges in front. It's
If you can mention, say, some.
well, clearly, hydrogen is the second smallest molecule. How do you transport it? How do you ensure that it doesn't escape? All of those questions still haven't been solved economically. The infrastructure to reticulate hydrogen is going to be interesting as well, and whether we can actually rely on only green hydrogen rather than all sources of hydrogen done in a carbon neutral fashion remains yet to be answered. But that doesn't mean it won't be solved. But therefore, forming things like the task force is in some ways an acknowledgement that there is a number of issues still to be fully resolved before it becomes a mainstream product.
That seems to be very interesting, and in fact, this also takes up that this is not as simple as normal agreement. This is more of a challenging task, isn't it?
It is indeed. And how do you convert, and where's the energy source for converting it into pure hydrogen is also part of the equation. It is easy to say, harder to execute, I think. But where there's a will, there's a way, one hopes.
Certainly, where there is a will, there is a way. So, are there any epitomes with respect to the green hydrogen that both the countries can follow the suit?
No, I think it's still all very, very pioneering, and so it's very hard to find a fully successful outcome yet, in a commercial sense. It's certainly scientifically able to be done.
Okay, and how about Australia? You spoke about India, that how it's a carbon, and how in fact Australia can help India to find that net zero goals and sustainable development.
We have, Australia has one of the highest penetrations of solar panels in the retail component on domestic households. We are obviously pretty close to world leading on renewable energy penetration, other than hydro. So I think there's a lot that India can learn from how we've gone about it, and maybe also some of the mistakes we might have made, or other countries may have made. It's always good to have someone else make the mistakes and learn from them.
Very last thing, sir, there are also several other countries who are playing their own role in positive and as well as in negative way.
Part of the solution has to be places like India, and the heavy lifting has to be done by every person, regardless of race, religion, or colour or creed.
This very particular crisis of Russia and Ukraine, how and in which way it has had an impact on energy crisis all across the world?
Look, I think there's a couple of things that people sometimes overemphasise. I mean, for example, China boycotted Australian coal, and the Australian coal price went up. You would have thought that your largest market saying they're not going to buy it would cause a price drop. But in fact, coal is running at a record high. Equally with Ukraine and Russia, initially the gas price went up as one expected with the sanctions. But now it has equalised and come back down globally. It's still at a higher level than it was, but not at the levels it was in the northern winter a little while back. I think what that shows is that a disruption in supply chains or whatever else, eventually the market economy will find a way to equalise it. The pressure, it's sort of like the economics Boyle's law. Pressure will always equalise.
I'm sure External Affairs Ministers from India has given a response to that how and in which way. Why is it that always India has been, holded up in that way? So very last thing, how do you foresee the relation of India and Australia on this very particular energy sector and this particular walk of energy that is there? And is there a timeline that you feel that they need to work on and be speedy and
well, in a democracy, you need to have a relatively short timeline unless it's thoroughly bipartisan. The India relationship, from an Australian point of view, is bipartisan. So that means that there's not necessarily a political timeline. My understanding is Prime Minister Modi's got an election next year. And so I would have thought in the next term there needs to be some really concrete steps taken. I think that's probably where the timeline's going to come from politics.
So certainly where there is a will, there is a way, as you had said, and that's what everyone is hoping around. And that was a powerful talk with Mr. Richard Cottee on India, Australia, and how and in which way they can go ahead and energize in this very particular sector. Myself, Urvashi Khona, reporting from Sydney in Australia for The New Indian.
For such fine news breaks and video features from ground on your mobile phones, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, The New Indian, by clicking on the bell icon. Also, follow us on the social media handles on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook and Co.